Before we begin this podcast, I want to thank all of the listeners who have generously and wonderfully already contributed towards the annual Torch fundraiser, towards the 2025 Torch campaign happening still at givetorch.org. If you've given already, we want to thank you for your unbelievable generosity and friendship and support and your wonderful vote of confidence. We are very touched that you found us to be a worthy investment of your charity dollars. And yes, I said investment because your charity dollars are investments in organizations, in causes that are worthy. And we deeply appreciate, we're moved that you found our work to be a worthwhile investment. And we pledge, with the help of the Almighty, to work very hard to make you proud and to spread the Almighty's Torah in 2025 and beyond, to do it as broadly and as powerfully as possible. But we still need some help to reach our goal. As of right now, we're 88% of the way towards our goal. This is the 11th year that we transitioned, that our organization, Torch, has transitioned to doing an online fundraiser as our primary fundraiser. And every year, with the help of the Almighty and with your generosity, we managed to not only reach our goal, but to exceed it. And I hope that you'll give us a little boost to do that again in 2025. The website is givetorch.org. You can find a link in the description of the podcast. Click it, make a donation. Every donation is doubled. Every donation is matched. Your giving is amplified, and you can support our work very strongly right now. GiveTorch.org. Our organization is unusually positioned. We don't charge dues or membership or embership. We don't put anything behind a paywall. We don't believe in ads. And we don't have funding from big foundations or big organizations. The way we pay our bills is by reaching out to you, to our friends, to our students, to our listeners, to all the participants in our programs. You enjoy our work. You enjoy what we do. This should be a cause that you want to support. We want your support. We need your support. We want you to partner with us. Invest in us. This is our only campaign in 2025. This is it. All of the eggs are in one basket. And we're doing good. We're at 88%. And we need a little nudge, a little boost, a little push to get us past the finish line. Help us get there. Help ensure that the great work of Torch endures and continues to flourish and to serve as a brilliant beacon of light in 2025. Visit givetorch.org. Give what you can give and support the great work of Torch and light up the torch to ensure that our work continues going strong. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoy the podcast, and my email address is rabbiwolbe@gmail.com. Today's subject is a bit different. It's a bit exotic. It's something that I'm absolutely fascinated by. It's something that I never hear anyone speak about. And I was only aroused to it by the early writings of my grandfather of blessed memory. But even in his writings, he spoke about it a lot in his younger years, and it largely disappears in his later writings. I suspect that maybe he felt that this idea is so advanced, it's perhaps a bit too ambitious for the weaker generations that ensued over time. As we know, my grandfather used to speak about this a lot, generations regressed or are constantly regressing, and what can be expected of the earlier generations is perhaps a bit too much for the successive generations. And maybe what we're going to discuss today is too advanced for us. Maybe it's asking too much, but I still think it's a fascinating concept, and the concept itself, and certainly parts of the ideas, are valuable and useful, even for small people like us. So I want to risk it. Let's risk it. And let's discuss this very advanced and powerful subject. Once a person becomes secure in their religious standing, the first step we would say is you have to make sure that you're secure in your religious standing. You're on firm ground. At that time, it's appropriate for a person to think, how will they ascend? How will they elevate? 2 steps. Firm on the ground, and then plot your ascent to heaven. The Talmud tells us that a man who doesn't own property is not a man. Now, this is not some sort of statement about who could vote. You have to be a landowner to vote or something like that. As we are familiar with these sorts of teachings of the Talmud, there's some sort of larger message, a deeper message that's being conveyed. For a person to be a serious person, you have to be rooted in the ground. You have to have a degree of stability and security before you can begin to truly ascend. But once a person is firmly rooted on the ground, then it's time to turn your attention heavenwardly. It's time to plot, to scheme, to strategize a way to ascend. The Torah tells us that this is at the end of Moshe's life, chapter 30 of Devarim. Moshe is talking about a mitzvah. He doesn't identify which mitzvah it is, but it's a mitzvah. Rashi says it's Torah study, maybe it's repentance. And Moshe is trying to encourage the people, this mitzvah is not so distant and difficult for you. It's not in the heavens that you may argue, well, who's going to ascend to the heavens to get it for us? And it's not in the distant lands across the seas. No, it's very close. It's in your mouth. It's in your heart to do it. This is a very famous statement in the Torah. Moshe, at the end of his life, encouraging the people to realize that those very lofty levels of greatness are actually embedded within a person. But there's a fascinating comment in Rashi. Moshe is saying that this mitzvah that he's referring to, it's not in the heavens. Rashi says, well, what if it was in the heavens? It's not in the heavens. It's in your mouth. It's in your heart. But suppose it was in the heavens. In that counterfactual world. If this mitzvah was in the heavens, you would have to ascend to heaven. You have to pursue it, ascend to heaven, and acquire it, and fulfill it. Rashi is saying that we have a mitzvah. It's not so hard. It's in your mouth. It's in your heart. But had it been in the heavens, you would be required to ascend to heaven. Now, this is not hyperbolic. Nothing in Torah is hyperbole. In the counterfactual world, that there was a mitzvah that was in the heavens, Rashi's telling us we would need to ascend to the heavens to get it. How do you ascend to heaven? So my grandfather, blessed memory, used to talk about the ladder of Jacob. In chapter 28 of Genesis, Jacob is fleeing from his brother, and he stops off on Mount Moriah, and he has a very memorable dream. He dreams, and he sees in his dream a ladder that's rooted in the ground, and the top, the head of the ladder, is all the way in the heavens. And he sees the angels of God going up and down said ladder. We have a description here of a connection between heaven and earth. Jacob witnessed it, and the Torah tells us about it. This is the way to ascend to heaven with a ladder that's firmly rooted in the ground, but the end point of that ladder is in the heaven. And this is the idea that my grandfather, blessed memory, in his early years wrote about a lot. And he cataloged many, many examples of this idea of how a person who's here on the ground, very far, we think, from God, from the heavens. He cataloged many examples of ladders where a person starts off ground zero and starts ascending a ladder, a spiritual ladder that reaches all the way to the heavens. And he gives a very easy example, or maybe it's easier said than done, as all these things are. The verse in Scripture, Devarim chapter 6, describes 3 characteristics. And it sounds like a typical Devarim Deuteronomy verse. Es Hashem Elokecha tira. Hashem your God you should fear. This is the mitzvah we're told many times in the Torah. You should fear God. Ve'oso sa'avod, and him you shall worship. Fear of God, worship of God. Ubishmo tishaveya, and in his name you shall swear. Rashi explains what's happening over here in this verse. This is Devarim 6:13, an easy citation to remember. Rashi says if you have level 1 and level 2, naturally you will have level 3. If a person acquires fear of heaven and they worship God, level 1, level 2, then they will always swear in the name of God, meaning that they will not swear falsely. They'll be very careful in how they invoke the name of God because they'll have such an appreciation, such a palpable recognition of the presence and the power of God. They'll never swear falsely. They'll always have the proper gravity towards any matters of theology of God. So they won't just be throwing out the name of God in vain. They won't be swearing falsely. Why? Because they have what you need to have that proper recognition. You start off with fear of God. Now, how you get that is a separate question. But if you have that and you worship God, then naturally that brings to level 3, in his name you shall swear. This is a verse in Scripture. Rashi explains it. It's a ladder. Fear of God, service of God brings you to the point where you will swear in the name of God, meaning you'll have that proper recognition. How do you do it? How does a person become so cognizant of God they'll never swear falsely? Well, you have to ascend a certain ladder. And the verse tells us fear of God, number 1, service of God, worship of God, number 2. That's how you arrive to the top of this ladder, to have that proper recognition. This is a verse in Scripture, but in the Talmud and in the subsequent writings of our great sages, my grandfather cataloged many examples of this phenomenon, of this idea, where a person starts off with level 1, and then brings level 2, and level 3, and so on. There is a progression and a sequencing starting from something which is rooted in the ground, which is accessible to us. We don't have a hard time thinking, how do I walk horizontally? The vertical is the difficult challenge for us. You find something that's accessible to you where you are at, and if that brings you up one rung, well, now you are able to access the next rung, and so on. One rung after another until you reach the top, until you reach heaven. The Talmud, in the book of Avodah Zarah, documents a multi-layered, multi-runged ladder that brings a person to the highest levels imaginable. The Talmud cites another verse in Devarim, which sounds innocuous enough. V'nishmarta, you should guard yourself mikol davar ra, from every bad thing. The Torah warns us, commands us, to avoid, to guard ourselves, to protect ourselves from every bad thing. You read it, it says, okay, well, that means to get a flu shot or vaccines, be healthy, be physically healthy, be spiritually healthy. You can read it very fast and not understand the implication of what you just read. You should guard yourself and protect yourself from every bad thing. That's a mitzvah in the Torah that's asked of us, simpletons. Every bad thing, not only we should avoid it, we should protect ourselves against it. We should guard ourselves against that. So the Talmud interprets this as saying, that means, what does it mean to protect yourself against all bad things? You shouldn't have anything in your head during the day, any thought any fleeting illicit thought that can lead towards impurity at night. Don't think anything during the day that can lead to impurity at night. This is the demand of the verse. Guard yourself, protect yourself from every bad thing, even something as seemingly out of our control as the thoughts that we have by day that can lead to problems of impurity at night. And one of the sages said, I will tell you how to do this. You have to follow a ladder. Now listen to this ladder. It starts off with Torah study. Torah study, well, that's accessible to us. Moshe brought it down from heaven and gave it to us and spelled it all out for us. That's the starting point. And if a person studies Torah properly, they'll become vigilant in matters of spirituality. And if a person's vigilant in matters of spirituality, they'll have alacrity. Vigilant means to not do something which is prohibited. And alacrity is to yes do something which is desirable. Starting off with Torah, vigilance, alacrity, cleanliness, spiritual cleanliness. There isn't any drop of improper behavior. You're not lacking any good stuff, and you're not, God forbid, falling prey to any bad stuff. That's the fourth level of the ladder. And that brings to abstinence. You're starting to become less physically oriented. And that brings to purity. And that brings to piety. And that brings to humility. And that brings to fear of sin. And that brings to holiness. And that brings to prophecy. And that brings to resurrection of the dead. This is a teaching in the Talmud. The question is, how does a person avoid all bad things, protect themselves, guard themselves against all bad things? Even things that seem to be totally out of our control, like a fleeting thought that seems to elbow its way into our mind. The way you do it, you got to follow a very specific ladder. The ladder starts off with Torah. Well, that's accessible to us. I tell you, go resurrect the dead. You say, well, I can't do that. Why can't you do that? Because you're not up to that stage of the ladder. But there's a way to get there. You have to follow this progression, this ladder. By the way, we have a whole book. The book is based upon this citation in the Talmud, and it goes through every stage of this ladder and explains exactly how to do it. Torah brings to vigilance, brings to alacrity, and so on. Each one of them will have several chapters to explain what it is, how to accomplish it, and how to avoid losing it. But this is the pattern. You start with level 1, which is accessible to you, and that gives you another run that you could reach for, another run you could reach for. At the top of the run, you're in heaven. You could revive the dead. Ain't that cool? A foolproof way to do that. That's a teaching in the Talmud. It's a ladder. How does a person become altruistic? From the very beginning of our life, we're motivated for self-advancement. The idea of doing something without intention of gaining any personal benefit to us, it's something which is inaccessible. Is altruism even feasible? Can I do something not because I intend to gain anything from it, only because it's right? Talmud says, this can be accomplished, this must be accomplished, but it has to follow a certain progression. You have to go on the ladder. You cannot be altruistic from day one. It's not possible. You have to follow a ladder. This is featured in many places in the Talmud. Le'olam, a person should always engage in Torah study and mitzvos for their own benefit. Shelo lishma, not for its intended benefit, not altruistically. For ulterior motives. Study Torah because other people will say, look how dedicated and how diligent this person is. Do mitzvahs so you'll get reward. Study Torah so you'll become more intelligent. That's what you should do. Constantly, consistently. Shemitoch shelo lishma ba lishma. For through doing something for ulterior purposes, you will become altruistic. How does a person become altruistic? You have to follow a ladder. And the ladder starts off entirely. You're doing it for your own benefit, either because you want honor, respect, they'll pay you, people will look up to you, you'll become more righteous, and that will give you more influence. You tell the kid, you study Torah, I'll give you a lollipop. Study Torah, I'll buy you some nice sneakers. Study Torah, you'll be able to be called a rabbi. You'll have ordination. People will respect you. They'll think you have something to contribute. You'll sit all the way in the front. When you walk into the room, everyone will stand up. Ooh. Study Torah, because then your soul is elevated. And study Torah, and then when your soul removes itself from your body, when you die, you go to heaven, and the angels will respect you. They'll get reward in paradise, in heaven. Just different levels of a lack of altruism. The ultimate goal is to study Torah because that's what the Almighty said to do. That's the highest goal. To get there, you have to ascend a ladder. And only through doing something for the wrong reasons will you come to do something for the correct reasons. It's a ladder. It's in the Talmud. When you look at the writings of the medieval sages, the Rishonim, you find many, many ladders. And again, this is all cataloged and chronicled and organized and delineated by my grandfather in his early writings. You don't see this in later writings. How does a person love God? I said the Shema today. Ve'ahavta Hashem Elokecha. You should love Hashem your God. Love? How do I love God? I have a hard enough time thinking about God. Oh, the infinite. We're not capable of really appreciating the infinite. We can understand it, that there's something that's infinite. But to love God with all our hearts, with all of our resources, with our life, to have an emotional connection with God that I can't even conceive in my mind. The 4-letter name of God is ineffable. The Tetragrammaton. You can't say it. Why? Because that's a name that almost refers to God's essence. And God's essence? Well, that's beyond us. And you have to love God? How do you formulate an emotional connection with Almighty God? This is a mitzvah. One of the 613 mitzvahs that we are commanded to do. How do you do it? To answer this question, we look at Rambam's ladder. He gives us detailed and specific instructions of what you can do and how it leads you to what you cannot do unless you have those preliminary steps. Yachshov, to think. Most of us could do that. I don't know. Gen Z, I don't know how much they could think. No offense to the Gen Z friends of Torch. Yachshov, level 1. V'yizbonein, level 2. To think and to ponder and to cogitate and to ruminate. What do you think about? You think about not God, but what God gave us, His Torah, His handiwork, His mitzvos. The Torah is formatted for us. The mitzvos are patterned for us. The handiwork of God is everywhere. Literally everything that exists is the handiwork of God. Everything besides for God is a creation of God, is the handiwork of God. We could call this nature. We could call it science. It's all the handiwork of God. You think about it, and you think deeply. You cogitate and ruminate upon it. Ad shenasidehu, until you have an insight and an understanding, a deeper understanding in Torah, in mitzvahs, in God's handiwork. That brings a person to a eureka and aha moment of unparalleled pleasure. The highest level of pleasure humanly possible. This pleasure, says the Rambam, is love of God. This is a very novel, powerful ladder of the Rambam. You start off with thinking. That's accessible to us horizontally. But when you have that, it's the first rung of the ladder. That you think deeply, which is a different type of thinking. A thinking that dominates your life. And you spend days and nights thinking about it. You start dreaming about the thing you're thinking about. That's a different level of thinking. Maybe it's the next level up. And you're not just thinking about who's going to get kicked off the island, right? You're thinking about what God gave us to be able to connect with Him. His Torah, His mitzvos, and His handiwork. And you understand something. You have an achievement that you unlock something. That will bring the highest level of pleasure. And that level of pleasure, that's love of God. There is a way for us to love God. It has to follow this pattern. This is what they do, by the way, in yeshiva. There was one like, what are these young sages doing in the yeshiva? Why are they so excited to be there? You walk in there and you see young sages screaming at each other, top of their lungs, in a packed room, and you open, they have books written in Aramaic that are thousands of years old, and it's alive. What are they doing? They are plumbing the depths of God's Word, God's Torah, and they're enjoying it because they're engaging in this form of an experience. Thinking, but thinking deeply, cogitating. And if they're fortunate and they're committed, they'll have insights. And those insights are unparalleled by any other human experience. And that is love of God. And that is possible. It's achievable. It's not easy, but it is achievable. You have to follow this ladder. We have a mitzvah, and the only way to do it is by following a specific set of instructions. As laid out by the Rambam, we have a ladder authored by the Rambam. Now, there's the Rambam Maimonides, there's Ramban Nachmanides, who comes the next generation. And he too has a ladder. This is the famous Igeres HaRamban, the letter of the Ramban. The Ramban wrote a letter to his son, and it's really a whole book of ethics condensed into a short letter. And if you parse it out, you see that he's telling us step to step to step to step. It starts off, speak all your words pleasantly. When you speak every word pleasantly, even when it's a tense moment, tensions are high, to every person at all times, always speak your words pleasantly. That will save you from anger, which is the worst character trait because it brings a person all sorts of sins. Oh, I'm hot-tempered. Oh, I have a short fuse. I can't control my rage. Yes, you can. The way you do it is to train yourself to always speak calmly. Every word that you say pleasantly to every person at all times. We can speak calmly. We have to train ourselves to speak calmly at all times to all people, in every instance, in every circumstance pleasantly. But that's maybe doable. You do that, you'll save yourself from anger, which is the worst of the characteristics. And when you save yourself from anger, what's the next rung on your ladder? Then you start to feel humility. We don't think of anger and humility being related. if someone controls their anger and they always speak pleasantly, then they'll become humble. And humility is the greatest of all positive characteristics. And once you have humility, that will lead a person to awe of God, fear of God. And that will lead a person to protect themselves from all sins. And when a person has that, they'll be happy with their lot. Now, again, we would want to stop and say, okay, well, how does this lead to the next thing? And we want to understand more of the mechanisms. But just from a broader perspective, this is a ladder. Speak your words pleasantly, you'll avoid anger. Avoid anger, you'll become humble. Humble will lead to awe of God. Awe of God will lead to avoiding all sins. And that will lead to a person be happy with their lot. And then the Spirit and the presence of God will reign over a person. And a person will sense the zenith, the splendor of God's presence. And a person will be able to taste a little bit of the feeling of paradise. You start off, you're an angry person. Doesn't have a palpable sense of God. Where's the awe of God? Where's the fear of all sins? Where's the humility? You start off, speak every word pleasantly to all people at all times. And that puts you on this trajectory of experiencing the presence of God at all times and having a little bit of a taste of paradise. That is the top of the ladder that's all the way in the heavens. And again, this is constructed for us by the Ramban. It's a whole book. It's a whole life. It's a ladder. And then there's Rabbeinu Yonah. And he has multiple ladders. In one, he talks about fear of God, leading to love of God, leading to shame before God. Now, to us, that may sound strange. Shame before God? Yes. When someone has a palpable and visceral recognition of God's omnipresence, what does that look like? If you're always in the presence of God, you feel so small and so meaningless compared to God, you feel a sense of shame. That's what a human in heaven experiences. It's a ladder that brought a person all the way to heaven. And Rabbeinu Yonah also has another ladder. And by the way, I want to stress, if we talk about, how to acquire humility, it's part of the ladder, but it might be like a section of the ladder. It might have 500 steps in it, meaning even within each one of its characteristics, there is many, many, many steps. Of course, but the framework, that's what we're trying to focus on over here. Another framework, also courtesy of Rabbeinu Yonah, one of the great medieval sages. And he organizes the character traits that are also mitzvos. We think of character, there's, I don't know, how many different character traits are there? 1,000? And we have to refine ourselves in all of them, right? We have to fix whatever it is that's not fixed. We have to rectify whatever is not rectified. There is a list of character traits that are also mitzvos. And Rabbeinu Yonah organizes it as a ladder. And the first one may sound a bit surprising. It's the characteristic of choice, of making choices. We've spoken about this in the past. We assume that free will is just the de facto state of humanity, as if we are stationary and all these choices come to us. Actually, the truth is, we have to earn free will. We have to earn our ability to make choices. And that's the first rung of the ladder. And then there's Torah study. And then there is going in God's ways. And then there is the next level, which is to appreciate and to think about the greatness of God. And the next level, which is to remember all of God's kindnesses. And the next level is holiness. And the next level is worship of God. And the next level is awe of God. And the next level is love of God. And the highest level, dvekus, to cleave to God. Again, this is the whole work of a lifetime, but just from the 30,000-foot view, we see a certain progression to realize that we have agency. We can determine our direction in life. We can choose to improve, but we have to realize that. We have to earn that. To earn the recognition that we can choose. And moving up from there until we arrive at dvekus, where we are, so to speak, cleaving to God. You want to fix your Yetzer Hara. How do you do that? How does someone fix their evil inclination? How do you do that? Rabbi Israel Salanter, he's more of a contemporary. He lived in the 19th century. He constructed a ladder. The first step is the study of the teachings of our sages, to do it with emotion. Meaning we could study it as dry material, text that we read, and we try to understand it as if we're studying text. He advocated to study it with emotion, to sing it, to say it over and over and over until it penetrates our unconscious, to feel it in our bones. If you do that, you can advance the next rung, which is to conquer the Yetzer Hara. And level 3 is to fix it. And that brings a person to absolute, unbridled joy. Joy in the worship of God. And I will add, my grandfather Bus Marie brought other examples that I omitted. This is a fascinating, in my opinion, and very advanced concept. Once we are ready to ascend, we're secure on earth. We have to find a ladder to heaven. My grandfather Bus Marie used to say that this is like a soldier. What happens when a soldier is drafted? They take his civilian clothing and they take it off. They give him uniform. And you're like a number. And you cannot decide what you do. Everything about your life and your schedule is regimented. The Jewish people are told that we're like the army of God. The first stage is like boot camp, is where all of our wishes and our agenda and our plans and our schedule, it's all governed by God. You wake up in the morning, I want breakfast. No. You have to pray before you eat. Okay, I did my prayer. I wore my tefillin. I said the Shema. I did the Amidah. I finished the prayer. Now it's time to eat, right? No. Gotta make your blessings. And even when you eat, you're supposed to think about the fact that this food is only because I'm a soldier of the Almighty. And now I want to go into my PlayStation. No, now it's time to study my Torah. And so on. Wherever you go, wherever you turn, there are rules and there are very strict strictures of how you're supposed to live. Your day is not yours. Your life is not yours. Your decisions are not yours. You're a soldier. That is level 1 of firming your life as a follower of God. But once you've acclimated to that sort of life, once the soldier is a soldier, well, now it's possible for them to become a general, to get promoted, to develop their own abilities within that framework. That is the ladder. And Rav Abasman used to say, when we arrive as Jews, we're going to take off our civilian garments and we put on our tzitzis and we put on our tefillin and we learn how to utilize the weaponry of war, Torah and prayer, which are compared to a sword and a bow. And every action and every thought and every word that we utter must be in line with our training. But once we're good, we're acclimated, we're good soldiers, it's time to find the ladder. You're fulfilling all 613. You're living as a soldier. You're fully compliant with the laws. You're secure in your standing. How do we ascend? How do we find some way of expressing our own unique contribution in our spiritual life? That's the topic of the ladder. And the reason why we have so many of these examples is because each one of them can be useful for us. So the easy way of choosing a ladder can say, listen, I want to choose the ladder of the Rambam or the Ramban or the one from the Talmud that is incorporated into the Mesilas Yesharim. These are all frameworks that our great sages themselves, they developed, they blazed a path, and they wrote about it for us to say, you could follow what I did. It's much easier to follow a well-trodden path that was blazed by a great sage than to find one of your own. So maybe we could stop here and say, okay, we have all these examples, and provided that we're a good soldier, provided that we're firmly rooted on the ground, that we have our real property, that we've become acclimated to the life of a soldier of God. Well, okay, choose one of these ladders and begin to climb. But it's also possible to devise your own ladder. So this is like the advanced of the advanced. For us, it's like, okay, let's try to become a little bit of a soldier of God. But this is when someone is a full soldier of God, and they realize the imperative that they have to ascend, and they don't want to rely on one of the other paths. They want to also develop their own. This is like the 1% of the 1% of the 1% of the 1%. You can see perhaps why this theory and this concept maybe was dropped out of the writings of my grandfather over the years when he saw maybe it's just asking too much. Maybe it's asking too much. Maybe we should say, okay, let's become a soldier of God for, 5 minutes a day. That's probably where we're up to, For 2 minutes a day, let's try to live life as a soldier of God. Maybe that's where, the state that we're in. But just for fun, just for kicks, let's ask the question, how do you develop your own ladder? I'm going to share what my grandfather said, and I'm going to offer my own, perhaps. Once we're speculating, once we're way out of our league, might as well just spitball a little bit over here, right? My grandfather, blessed memory, used to say, when a person realizes the imperative to find a ladder to heaven, the question they have to ask is, which ladder should they ascend? Meaning, even if they don't want to develop their own ladder, they want to choose one of the ladders that our sages have devised. Which one should they choose? Which one of their abilities, what are their unique abilities that they should develop? And he advocated to start from within. There is no quality that's in the heavens cleaving to God, presence of God at all times, shame before God, love of God, all these very lofty things that we think that we have no connection with. Within our heart, within our soul, there's a tiny little kernel of that already. All the lofty levels, all the tops of the ladders are rooted within our nature. There's a seed, a kernel of those lofty levels already within us. Anyone that has any bit of sensitivity towards spiritual matters already has an affinity to God. Anyone who's had the great privilege of studying the great yeshivos knows what it's like to have that experience of that awe and that appreciation and that love of God from studying, from cogitating upon his works, his Torah, his mitzvos, perhaps even his handiwork. The first level is not to be frightened. Oh, this is too advanced. Oh, I'll never love God. I'll never fear of God, never cleave to God. These are all mitzvahs of the Torah. It's not optional. It's commandments. They are rooted within you. Don't be frightened. Don't be intimidated. This is doable. You find that little kernel you have within you. And that is something that you ascend the ladder with. That's something you develop and actualize. You have it all within you. Find the thing that you have the most affinity towards and develop it. This is a very unique way of advancing spiritually. It's using yourself, your heart, your catalog of characteristics as a Torah, so to speak. This is what the Almighty implanted in your soul. This is what makes you unique and different than everyone else. Who gave you that soul? Who gave you those characteristics? The Almighty God. It's a form of giving the Torah, so to speak, but it's personalized to you. And you take that. That's the starting point. And my grandfather Bessemer used to call this Derech Eretz, which means the way of the land, but it has a lot of different connotations. But the Talmud tells us Derech Eretz Kadma la Torah. Derech Eretz comes before Torah. And if there is no Derech Eretz, there is no Torah. And if there's no Torah, there's no Derech Eretz, the Mishnah tells us. Derech Eretz, in this context, means the development of the characteristics that you have within you naturally. The innate characteristics that come pre-installed within your heart, within your soul. Identify them. Develop them. And that will be your North Star, so to speak. That is what you realize. This is what you have. You have a little kernel of it. But with Torah, Derech Eretz comes before Torah, but once you have that, you must use Torah in that context to help develop and flesh out and bring to the surface those characteristics. Once a person is a soldier, and the stage of becoming a soldier is a little bit about losing your identity, right? I want to sleep in. No. I want to party. No. Stage one is you have to become regimented. And you're not thinking so much about your unique characteristic and your unique skills and all that. No. You're becoming a soldier. This is boot camp. Once you're secure in that standing, you start within. Find your characteristics. Don't neglect them. These are the seeds of your greatness. If they're not watered, they will rot. If they're not tended to and cultivated, they will rot. Derech Eretz Kadma Torah. Derech Eretz comes before Torah. But Torah is necessary. As the Mishnah tells us, Imein Torah ein Derech Eretz. You identify that, and then the Torah amplifies that and expands that and brings that to the surface, actualizes that. That is how you find your ladder. Very, very advanced. I want to suggest maybe a different approach. And this is still a work in progress. I'm thinking about this. But I think there's something there. When Jacob, when he was dreaming and he saw a ladder, and on the ladder there were angels going up and down, the Midrash tells us, who were these angels? Who were these angels ascending to heaven and then coming back down? So Rashi tells us, well, if the angels of the land of Israel were going up because there's special angels, guardian angels for the land of Israel, and well, now Jacob's about to leave the land of Israel, he's going to go outside the land of Israel, and there's a different set of angels for that. So those are the angels who are coming down to protect him. That's what Rashi says. That's one source. There is another midrash. And the midrash says that these were the angels of the nations. Which nations? The nations that will cause all sorts of trouble for Jacob's descendants. The Jewish people make their way to Egypt, exile, 210 years, they come out. They are forged as a nation at Sinai, and they enter the land and settle the land. This experiment that began with Abraham and was developed, Isaac and Jacob and the tribes and so on, they went through the crucible of Egypt, and now they emerged with the Torah, with prophecy, with Moshe and so on. They have fulfilled the dream. They are in the land. They have the temple. Things are wonderful. But then there is exile. Babylonians destroy the temple. Jews are in exile. They come back, but they also have the exile of Persia and Media. And then there's the exile of the Greeks. And the Romans destroyed the second temple. And the nation is plunged into the fourth and final exile. The exile called Edom. This is a very well-developed idea in our philosophy. There are 4 exiles, again, after Egypt. Egypt's the Alpha exile. That's really before we were made into a nation. In fact, the experience in Egypt is what made us into a nation. That was the crucible that separated the gold from the alloys. After the nation becomes a nation, they go through the exiles. And the 4 angels that Jacob saw, first was the angel of Bavel, of the Babylonians. And the next was the angel of the Persians. And the next was the angel of the Greeks. And the next was the angel of Edom. And they were going up the ladder. And the first one, the angel of Bavel, of Babylon, went up 70 rungs and then came down. And that's to indicate that the Jewish people will suffer in this exile for 70 years and then it will be over. And the next angel, the angel of Persia and Media, went up 52 rungs because this is going to be a 52-year exile. And then it came down. And then the third one, the angel of the Greeks, went up 100 rungs and came down. That third exile, the penultimate exile, is a 100-year ordeal. And then the fourth angel, the angel of Edom, goes up and past 100, past 500, past 1,000, past 1,500. And Jacob is exasperated. He's overwhelmed and he's terrified. Will this angel ever come down? Perhaps this angel will never come down. And God said to Jacob, Al tira, don't be fearful, my servant Jacob. Don't tremble, Israel. Even if you see this angel going all the way up to heaven, and he's already in the heavens, and he's next to God, he's still gonna go down. If he is as high as an eagle planting its nest amongst the stars, from there, God promises he will descend. Jacob sees the fourth angel, the angel of Edom, going up, and he does not see it coming down. And God has to comfort him. Don't worry, I got this one for you. When the angel of Edom falls, that's the end of all exiles. And that's really the end of the world as we know it. And it ushers in the era of Messiah. Perhaps the reason why Jacob did not see Edom fall is because Edom is really Esav. And maybe Edom is not eradicated, but rather it is reformed, as Rabbeinu Bachai says in Parshas Ha'azinu. But put that aside. When we think about angels going up to heaven, To me, that sounds very positive. If we're talking about someone constructing a ladder to heaven and angels are going up that ladder, that sounds very positive to me. A ladder to heaven is a means of ascent. And somehow the Midrash tells us, well, no, it's a stage of exile. And every time the angel's going up another stage, another rung of this ladder, it's worse. So to me, I had the question, wait a minute. Is going up this ladder, this is a positive thing or a negative thing? How can it be that this image that we have of Jacob's ladder and ascending of the ladder, this is something which is so positive, yet the Midrash describes it as exile? Evidently, and there's lots of proof to this, exile is also a means of ascent. The Jewish people got the Torah where? Not in the land of Israel. We were forged as a nation, the splitting of the sea, the 10 plagues, it's in Egypt. The writing of the Talmud, it's in Babylon. It's in the Babylonian Talmud. So much of our history, so many of our greats, so much of that happens outside the land, in the non-ideal setting of our people, in exile. Exile is painful. Exile is not ideal. We would call it suboptimal, but it is also a means of ascent. Now, Jacob is representing the Jewish people. He's Jacob. He's Israel. He's the forefather. He's the root. But I think this is true for us as individuals as well. There's a means of ascent that may be viewed as exile. The Talmud says that suffering is a means to acquire the greatest gifts that God gave us. The Torah, land of Israel, paradise, Olam Haba. These are the 3 greatest gifts that the Almighty gave to us. And all of them He gave to us via suffering, via trials and tribulations. Suffering is a means of acquisition. Exile is a means of acquisition. Now, what does it mean to suffer? What does it mean in this context? The Talmud tells us if you stick your hand in your pocket because you want to get a nickel and you pull out a quarter instead, that's suffering. No one's going to write about that. I had this terrible episode of suffering. Because I found I was fumbling for change, I got the wrong change. Come on. What the Talmud's telling us is that suffering is a way of life in which God is always involved. And if you want this and you end up with that, even as minor as that may be, that's a sign, that's an indication that God is still involved with you and is nudging you, is speaking to you, so to speak, is directing you, is redirecting you. Now, a lot of people don't live a life like that. When they view suffering, it's just suffering. You have to have a degree of faith to realize, to be attentive to these messages. But if a person hears them clearly, and every day, and every tiny thing that happens to them in their life, it's a recognition of the fact that God is actively involved with their life. They have like a co-pilot, so to speak. God is holding their hand and constantly adjusting and redirecting us at all times. And it's called suffering, it's called exile. It's actually a means of ascent. If we want to ascend, we are not on our own. He will help us. Haba l'tayr. Someone wants to become pure, someone who seeks purity will be aided from above. Perhaps this is another larger way to think about constructing our ladder of ascension. We're not doing this on our own. We have the Almighty helping us at every stage. So it may appear that we're like blind people fumbling in the darkness, groping around in oblivion. The truth is, God is close to all those who call out to him. And with that recognition, we approach the ladder. And we don't know where it's going to end up. But we know that the Almighty is at our side. We all, once we're ready, of course, we all need to find a ladder to heaven. And the end point of that ladder is in the heavens. Rosho Magia Shamayma. It's total transformation. It's absolutely radical transformation. The end point is the person who's all the way in the heavens is a different species. Someone who's totally transformed. Even emotionally, they're different. Not just intellectually. The starting point is, well, you gotta become a soldier. You gotta follow the rules. You're in boot camp. Your individuality is thrown out the window. Or it's preserved for a later date. Once that is secure, you're trying to ascend and become a different person. And to cease to act based upon the dogma of religion, but to fundamentally transform yourself. What does it look like? Well, what's the end point? So we have some examples. We have cleaving to God. Even those words, we have a hard time saying it. It sounds so foreign to us. Love of God. Fear of God. Awe of God. To us, it just sounds like we're just saying words. We're so at the bottom of this ladder. It's total fiction. Fanciful talking. Someone whose recognition of the omnipresence of God is so visceral that they're ashamed that they're in God's presence. That's the end point. But it starts here. And it's a ladder. And you take one rung at a time, and one rung leads to the next. And there's no skipping runs. If you try to leap to the top, you'll tumble down. And runs that are 2 steps ahead of you seem to be totally inaccessible to you because you have to follow the right sequence. But even we, small people, we can ascend to heaven. And our Savior has provided for us lots of models that we can use as frameworks. But if we're crazy and ambitious and out of our league, maybe, just maybe, we can construct our own. May we all be so fortunate as to ascend to heaven in one way or the other, not to skip any runs. Of course, the first part of it, we have to be secure. We have to have real property. We have to be a good soldier. But once we do that, we can and we must ascend to heaven. I thank you for listening. My email just is rabbiwolbe.com. I cherish your feedback, your emails, your questions, and your comments.